So we just looked at the example of some rocks. What if I was going to look at a river? And I've deliberately characterised it a little bit in a more flowing way, but it could be quite stark. Depending on whether the feeling of the river or the context of the river is strong and almost a bit violent, or whether there's some context folding around it where the river has a significance that's not necessarily terribly smooth or comfortable for us emotionally. So there's all these different ways of couching the story. So that's one way. Another way is you can think of it as being music for a movie scene. If there's a sunrise, what might you do? And then it gets very personal, of course, what sort of sunrise it is and what the context is. So all of these very important emotional factors, they will change the music. They'll make it very different from performer to performance, even from performer to performer, even from performance to performance. So I go on stage, I have a very clear map of the sort of terrain that I'm going to be describing. I'm never just playing notes, because I think that's about as interesting as just speaking any old words. Of course, spontaneous poetry with a real focus, a real emotional intention, can be very, very coherent. And so it is with music as well. So we can play very random notes, we can use completely free tonality and still convey a story very strongly, because it all comes down to the way the music moves, but also how we touch the instrument. So we could have something like this. Or we could do something with a different touch. So how I touch the instrument, how we touch the instrument, is it forceful? Or is it a bit more gentle? Huge difference in the story, as you can hear there. So I think this is in a way is the most important component for where the music goes and how it unfolds and the kind of effect it has. But for us as the artist, we need to have the nuts and bolts in place, I think. Certainly I prefer to do it that way, so I know whether I'm doing a free tonality or a pentatonic scale or a whole tone scale. I have a working vocabulary of about 40 different scales. We normally, obviously in classical music, we normally work out on the major and the harmonic minor and melodic minor, the diminished, the dominant sevenths, chromatics, but there's a lot more in music than that. And not only do I think they're wonderful scales and tone palettes to incorporate into our improvisation, but I think they also serve a greater purpose, which is they train us to listen very, very differently. to the intonation, but also the emotional meaning, the emotional impact of the different scale intervals, because we are affected by intervals very, very strongly. So if we take a major scale, one small variation, we put in a raised fourth. So we put in a D major, we sharpen the G. It's called a Lydian scale for the modes. Have a listen to the emotional context that creates. So very different to just a major scale. It's a lot more yearning. That raised fourth, we could take a whole tone scale, which I find fascinating. So there's no resolution, there's no half-tone step. But it still has this incredible character to it that really engages with us as a listener and a player. So these considerations of the emotional impact, even of intervals, where we're playing large or small intervals. Immediately, that creates a very different intensity from a lot of very dense, close intervals. So I hope that's a help in getting a bit of an understanding of, wow, there's all these things that I could actually do in my improvisation. So knowing what to do, we solve that with the particular groups of notes or scales, whether they're an ordered thing or a completely free tonality. Knowing that, even to use a free tonality, is hugely helpful, because then you're not trying to be in a scale. These things, they help us to really put our energy into playing again, instead of wondering what to do. The metrical aspect, the meter. So I call these the four parameters of music. The tonality is the first one. Second one is the meter, how it moves, the tempos. Is it accented? Is it very drone-like? Is it very still? Is there a lot of silence? These sort of considerations. The phrasing, whether it pushes, whether it pulls back. The stylistic considerations. Are we leaning in the direction of J.S. Bach, early music, Renaissance music, Elizabethan music, completely 21st century, very adventurous soundscapes, or note clusters, or minimalism like Terry Riley, Steve Reich, and these Philip Glass? What are we leaning towards? Or the sort of rich, the Ludoslavsky and a lot of the East European composers of the 20th century had this very intense richness to their music, and Bartok, of course. So it's not that we're copying them, but we do have to give a direction to the music, just as in a conversation, I feel, for it to really succeed, not just to be able to play, but for it to mean something for us and, of course, for our audience. So important. So this is the way that I create concert programs recordings, I go on stage with a story in mind or a theme in mind. It might be historical stories from different parts of the world, like ancient Persia and the Middle East, or it might be about South America, or it might be about the planets and the solar systems and the way everything moves in that enormous space, or it could be the old ancient rocks that we find and caves on the earth. Could be a kind of archaeology where we're looking at, and anthropology where we're looking at old civilizations or new ones or new ideas. We can find a context, and then you'll find that these various elements, it's like a magnet with iron filings, it gathers them in, because your emotional sensibility will filter out the things that aren't going to be working for you anyway. So, if we're trying to create something dramatic, that filters out a whole lot of different potential ways of playing, for instance. It filters out certain note combinations or ways of playing them. I'm not saying it's rigid, but in your own imagination, to suit your way of doing it, that will happen automatically. When you think of something dramatic, when you want to convey something very sensitive and delicate, whether you want to create something very romantic or something very beautiful or something very ugly to portray a message about some things in a story, this all goes into the pot, and it all comes from our own internal library. So that's the basis of everything that we'll be doing today and looking at today.